Oh, I'm the doctor. I have a sonic screwdriver. I need to go help Vincent. And here I am with my good friend Vincent Van Gogh. This is one of his many self-portraits that he made along the way. Remember, he was only a painter for a very short period of time, and so he was feverishly creating all of these artworks. Uh-oh, there's a weeping angel. I need to go. So here we are in one of Vincent's early paintings. This is his Potato Eaters. This is when he was still working in the Netherlands. He was actually a, let's say, 30-year-old living at home with his parents. Okay, so millennials, your generation didn't invent that. He was living at home. He'd gone through several careers. He really didn't know what he was doing. So he decides he's going to be a Dutch realist painter. And so he's painting this, and he wants to evoke the sense of the dirt that the peasants have on them. It's really kind of denigrating to the peasants. You know, as they're working in the fields and they're so poor that all they're doing is eating potatoes, okay? Uh-oh, I need to go on to his next phase. There's an oud. But Vincent doesn't live at home forever. He has a brother in Paris, his brother Theo, the long-suffering Theo. And he goes to Paris because Paris is where it's at. That's where everything is happening, as we've been learning about with the Impressionists. And he goes to Paris and he becomes absolutely smitten with the Impressionist style. So Van Gogh, you know, he's now totally jettisoned that old realist style, and he has discovered color, as you can see here. This is a factory at the French town of Asnières, which is sort of in this the suburbs were new at this time, the suburban area of Paris. And so you look at it at first and it's this very beautiful Impressionist painting, but you can see here the smoke is sort of adding to the sense of it. Not unlike what we saw when we looked at Turner. Oh, wait a minute. What is that? In terms of industrialization, I see in the distance a Cyberman. Okay, I have got to get out of here. So here we are now in a beautiful field full of hay and flowers and a zygon. We're going to assume that zygon is going to be friendly, at least for now. What happens is Van Gogh goes to the south of France. So remember he's been, his Dutch realist phase was the Potato Eaters, and then he was in Paris in his sort of Impressionist phase. And now here he's discovered the south of France, and this is a place that people will be going to. We'll be talking about this a lot because the color is very, very intense. I always think it's kind of the more Italian part of France, and so that's why people like it, but you know, that's me. And so you can see here this beautiful, vivid color that he is discovering here. And then look at you can see his very characteristic brushstroke here with the very wide brushstroke. And so that, again, it's very painterly. You can see that he's not attempting to mask that in any way. You know, I'm not too sure about that zygon, so I think we're going to move on to one of his other works. Okay, here we are in Van Gogh's Night Cafe, which is one of his most famous works of art. And this one is very interesting. This one we can also see the effect of Japanese prints because we have this nice, you know, sort of raking, strange perspective and large patches of color. But one of the things we also see here is this use of interior light. And so we think about Van Gogh, we think about him in terms of landscapes, but he's using this light, this gas light, to create this very sort of dreary, weary effect of the people who are in here. And he actually talked about this in terms, again, of symbolism, this idea of symbolism, and how he was trying to show the sort of tragic aspect of these people's lives. And you can see this by the sort of eerie sense of light. I guess you can also see this because I am seeing, for 1 second, the silence, even though I know I will forget about it soon. Okay, let's look at another example of Van Gogh's work in the south of France. And this is his Madame Roola. Madame Roola was one of his, well, let's face it, only friends. Okay, it was a very good friend of his, but one of his only friends. Vincent wasn't that easy to get along with. Here he is. He's still in the south of France. He's really in the south of France until he dies. And he is painting her as a portrait. And what I want you to notice here is, of course, we have all the brilliant color, but I want you to look at this and think about the way we were talking about Japanese prints. Think about the way we were talking about ukiyo-e and this flattening of space that we've talked about. And we've already talked about this in terms of Mary Cassatt, but we see this also with Van Gogh. Van Gogh was collected lots and lots of the ukiyo-e prints. He was fascinated with them. He repainted them. And so we have these large patches of color and pattern and this collapsing of space that goes on here, so behind Madame Roola. One of the things about Van Gogh, though, is that this is not just about form. What he's doing here is he's painting her. As you can see, it's almost non-naturalistic color. He's painting her in these sort of glowing colors of yellow and green. And this is because Van Gogh is someone we also associate with something that we call the symbolist movement. And the symbolists are now moving away from this idea of painting things just as they see them, which is what we talked about with the Impressionists. And instead, we're moving towards something in which colors have certain meaning. And in fact, Van Gogh talked extensively about Madame Roola and how she was this mother figure. Oh, Dr. Freud, this mother figure for him. And, you know, he actually painted a series of, he had plans to put her in the center and put 2 sunflower paintings on either side of her and to create a triptych. And so, you know, we know a triptych brings us back to this idea of sort of quasi-sacred imagery. And so she was a very, very important person to him. So Madame Roola, but in fact, I think I better get out of here because my arch enemy is here, the Daleks. So now we get to our key image. We get to the painting by Van Gogh that probably you are most familiar with, and this is, of course, his Starry Night. Now, we've taken this tour through Vincent's various paintings, and I think you can begin to see that, in fact, this is a fairly atypical image. We see this sort of vast space here, sort of perspectival space. We don't see that collapsed space that's coming out of his understanding from Japanese prints. We see in the valley all sorts of, we sort of see the foreground with this great cypress tree. We see the middle ground with the church with the steeple, and we see the background with the mountains. So what exactly is going on here? Well, Van Gogh, I'm sure that you all know, whoops, there goes my, I don't think I need it yet. I think I'm still safe in here. Van Gogh, as I'm sure you know, basically was crazy. We don't know what was wrong with him, okay? Inner ear, schizophrenia, you name it. It's all, he's been diagnosed with everything. But we do know that he did, speaking of inner ear, he tried to cut off his outer ear, and he succeeded for the most part. And so he was sent to an asylum. And this is actually a view from his window from his asylum. Now, he was apparently not allowed to paint in his room. I don't know why. It seems to me in this, we think about art therapy, that probably would have been pretty good for him. But this is the view that he had from his room. And this is a very remote part of France, and so he had these beautiful night skies in which he could see all kinds of stars and the moon. Now, of course, they didn't look exactly like this. We're a very long ways from the Impressionists, who were painting their first impressions, these first retinal impressions. What we're seeing here with Van Gogh is something that is much more expressive, much more symbolic. So let's take the middle ground here. We see this little church. Scholars have noted that this is a Dutch church. This little church would never have been in this valley in the south of France. So this is Van Gogh possibly, sort of hearkening back to his childhood that perhaps he remembered fondly. Who knows? But having a sense perhaps that he was at the end of his life. We have in the foreground, of course, this great, wonderful cypress tree that is this wonderful compositional device, because it's the first thing that if you all were to step into the painting the way I'm in the painting, the first thing you would see is, you can see how I'm sort of adjacent to this cypress tree. And so it's this marker that we've crossed the picture plane. And so it still goes back to very traditional styles of creating space. But the cypress tree also functions in this compositional element in that it unites all of these. There's a strong horizontal emphasis in all of this painting between the mountains and the sky, and this kind of rolling effect of what is going on celestially. And the cypress more or less unites all these. But again, the cypress probably goes back to this idea of symbolism and meaning. Cypress trees are often planted as memorials. They are often planted in cemeteries. And so Van Gogh would have been keenly aware of this, particularly in the south of France. And so it has these sort of funerary overtones to it. And he wrote about, because he was maybe a little crazy, he wrote about it, being this bridge to the stars. And as we can see here, that's literally the way it works as a compositional device. In the sky itself, you can get a good idea of Van Gogh's brushstroke. This sort of very, very painterly, clear, these beautiful colors. Not much black in here. These very, very vivid blues and yellows in here, and the sense again that it's moving, sort of urging us along with this. So in many ways, although this is a very famous work, it's in New York City, of course, at the MoMA, it is something that is fairly atypical of Van Gogh's work. And it's not the last thing he painted, but he was only painting for a short while after this. He really only painted for the last few years of his life. So he had an extraordinary output of paintings during that short period of time. Well, it sounds as though I am being called back into the present time, so I think we will leave this painting and move on.